Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Hamline Leo lecture. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Molly Glevy, and I work in the Alumni Relations Office at Hamline, and I am going to get us started today and introduce our speakers for Acing the virtual interview. We've been really looking forward to this one. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. First, you will be muted and your camera will be off for today's presentation. If you have a question for our speakers, please use the Q&A icon in the Zoom dashboard on your screen. Now, our speakers will take questions at the end of the presentation, but go ahead and if you have questions throughout, go ahead and drop those into the Q&A and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. If you have a question about the logistics of today's webinar, please use the chat icon in your Zoom dashboard. There are a few of us ready to try to help troubleshoot if things come up. And be patient with us as some of us are presenting from homes. You might hear pets or a lawnmower or anything like that during our Leo lecture, but we will work through these things together as we do. And with that, two other things actually. If you need to jump out at any point today, don't worry, we're going to be recording this and sharing it on our Alumni Relations website. Or if you have friends or colleagues who you'd like to share this presentation with after the fact, you are more than welcome to do so. Usually that takes a day or two for us to get it up on the website, but you should be able to find it there. And our speakers are going to use a poll during today's presentation. So if you want to have your phone handy, there's going to be a texting poll for you to participate in. And with that, I will get to introduce our two presenters for today, who are colleagues from the Career Development Center here at Hamline University. First, Masha Finn is a career counselor, and in this role, she meets individually with students and recent grads to support their career exploration and vocational planning. Masha received her BA in International Relations and French and Francophone Studies from Carleton, and her MA in Educational Psychology, Counseling Student Personnel Psychology from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. And Mara Stomas is also a career counselor in the Career Development Center, collaborating with students and recent grads to explore majors, careers, graduate school, or employment. Mara also works to build relationships with employers. She received her BS in Family Social Science and her MA in Counseling Student Personnel Psychology, also from the University of Minnesota at Twin Cities. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Masha and Mara.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Mara. I will be kicking off our presentation. As Molly had so kindly shared, yes, I'm a career counselor at the Career Development Center, and I also collaborate with employers who are looking to hire students and alumni. I'll also pass this over to Masha for her to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Masha Finn, and I'm a career counselor with Hamline's Career Development Center, and you'll be hearing from me a little bit more later on in the presentation. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Masha. So we're going to kind of kick off the presentation with some of that interactive polling. So if you can have, yes, your phone nearby. Otherwise, if you don't, you can also put up a new web page in your browser, and we'll have instructions in there in a couple slides. But first, I'll share how you can connect with us in the Career Development Center. So for those of you who might be more recent alumni, you can actually meet with us up to 3 years after your graduation date. And we can offer, one-on-one appointments. They're 60 minutes. There's no limitation on how many times you connect with, Masha or I. And the best way to connect with us is either by calling our phone number in the bottom right corner. Otherwise, we also have, you can connect with us by creating an appointment online through Handshake, which is our new job and internship board. We're really excited about it. We just launched it in November. So, you know, if you have any questions about that, happy to answer those towards the end of our presentation. But Handshake can be a great tool to network with employers, students across the United States, and also within Hamline itself. We also, and you have lifetime access to that platform. We also have a ton of online resources. Sometimes our website can be a little bit challenging to navigate, to find the information you might be looking for. So, you know, Amash and I will be sharing our emails at the end of this presentation, and you can feel free to email us at any point and, you know, ask, you know, do you have resources about this, or I can't find this? We're happy to point in the right direction. We are open virtually throughout the school year, and we're open from 8 to 5, and that also includes the summer months as well, so year round. And yeah, we'll look forward to connecting with you. So to kind of kick us off, I would really love to hear from you all what experiences you've had with virtual interviewing. Again, you can respond to this by putting in that poll ev.com/LeoLeo2020 on your web browser, or you can text Leo 2020 to the 5-digit code there. Know that it'll send you a link, but you can actually just respond A, B, C, or D via text. You don't have to click that link. So I think we activated the poll here, and it looks like some folks have had some video phone interviewing. We'll give it a minute or so here to kind of see what your responses are and what your experience has been. Yeah, things are coming in. And of course, if you've had multiple, you can choose multiple letters. Really cool. Phone interviews, super common. See some of you messaging as well. A little bit of video, your recording. Well, feel free to keep responding if you haven't yet already. I'll just touch on a few what we're seeing here. Phone interviews are obviously very popular. I think that those have been even, pre-pandemic, a really common intro way for employers to get to know, kind of screen their initial hires and then kind of ask for in-person or video after that. Looks like about a quarter. It's going to keep changing. A few of us have had video interviews and then video recordings. Those video recordings can be challenging because, they're asking you to answer a question and record yourself, and then you kind of have to watch it back, or maybe you don't get the choice. It kind of depends, but we'll touch on that too. Awesome. So maybe we'll leave it at that. To kind of piggyback off this question, I'd love to hear, change the next slide here, 1 second. We will ask you, what do you see as the most challenging aspect of virtual interviewing? So if you're already connected via text, you can just simply answer, nonverbals are really hard, and you can just write a few words. So we'll get some active text from you all to kind of what you've seen as the most challenging aspect. Communicating my energy and enthusiasm. Yeah, these might pop up really fast, but feeling like you. Eye contact so hard. You'll notice I'll try my best today, but it's hard to not want to look at, video or the screen itself rather than the camera. Harder to use my interpersonal communication skills. There's no feelings. How do you build a connection? Building rapport, where to pause or speak. Yeah, that's always so awkward. Gauging the energy in the room, being natural. Raise computer so you're not looking down. Yeah, we'll touch on that one too. Body language, you can't really read it. See some other ones, seeing if I missed any kind of main ones. Feeling like you're connecting with the employer. Conveying my essence, I like that one. Yeah, it's just really hard to understand the energy in the room, the energy you're giving off, for sure. Okay, but that's what I was gonna say. Appreciate that ad. The lag, not talking over each other, that's so real. It happens to me all the time. great because you've kind of practiced that active listening. But then at the same time, there's a little bit of a lag, and that can hinder that communication too in active listening. Tech problems, yes. I'm surprised I haven't seen that one more. Tech problems seem to happen every week for me at some point in the week. A good challenge. Yeah, so you all came up with quite a few. We'll touch on some and kind of how you can navigate those. So we can go to the next slide here. This kind of touches on some of what you've all already shared. So, you know, there's definitely advantages and disadvantages to the virtual landscape and interviewing. So we'll kind of piggyback off some of those disadvantages or kind of the drawbacks. The potential for tech issues can kind of run the gamut. You know, you think you've tested everything and then all of a sudden something happens. There's a little bit of unpredictability there and perhaps lack of control on our end. The personal connection can be really challenging, knowing, you know, that, you know, if you can read the interviewer, kind of their posture, understanding kind of their perspective. It's really hard to get that through that virtual space because everyone may be, you know, silent as you're talking. They may share some nonverbals, maybe they don't. Or you on the phone and you can't see any of that smile or engaging. Are they listening? Am I saying things that resonate? I don't know. And then I think, you know, lack context. So this one can touch on a wide variety of things, but the one thing about, you know, coming to an employer and interviewing in person is you can kind of get a feel for the organization, the culture, the way they're, you know, even the way that they're set up as an office can give a lot of insight, and you know, you lack all that context. You don't get to feel the vibe of what it's like in person and kind of in that space on a day-to-day basis. On the flip side, I would say that there are some advantages here. So, you know, if those of you are applying out of state or kind of have, you know, can kind of open your job search even further. I've noticed a lot of positions now, you know, employers are saying like, we're open to remote working, and that may have not been an opportunity in the past. So maybe you were always interested in an organization, but maybe because of family or other reasons you couldn't move. And now that might be an opportunity that it can be a little bit easier to navigate applying and engaging in that space. You can kind of have your notes within reach. If you're someone who kind of likes having those within reach to kind of give you subtle reminders, that can be really useful. And then the comfort of your own space. So that can go two ways. Either it can go really great because, you know, you're comfortable, you're confident, you can kind of build your stuff up in your space. On the flip side, it may be too comfortable, and maybe some of you really are helped by the adrenaline rush. I mean, the adrenaline rush still, I would say, probably comes when you're virtually interviewing, but when you're, you know, going to the space and place, that can kind of help kickstart that interview and the energy you want to convey. No traveling stress. I think of actually a friend of mine who would always go to the place she was interviewing the day before, and then she, you know, felt really overwhelmed. So oftentimes she, with maybe parking downtown, or, you know, if it's a highly dense area, trying to navigate that in the moment, or, you know, if it's rush hour, not knowing how long it might take you to get there. My friend actually often would show up to interviews like 30 minutes earlier, and then just kind of have to hang out in her car and feel a little overwhelmed. So it, you know, hopefully this mitigates that a little bit. So yeah, to kind of get us, you know, started off here, I'm going to just touch on how you can prepare for this virtual landscape and all the things that may come up. And then I'll turn it over to Masha, and she will just kind of talk over the process of the interview and kind of best practices for you all to keep in mind as you prepare to answer those questions and engage in that conversation. So some of you mentioned, you know, context and, you know, feeling the vibe, and you mentioned a good amount of you have had phone interviews. So this may not be really new for even employers in this case. A lot of employers will like do phone screen. They may ask like a little bit more basic questions. Tell me about yourself, which can and cannot be a basic question. We'll touch on that, or may not be. And then they may also, you know, why this position, just kind of get a feel for you to see, you know, how you might present, and then ask you to come meet in person. So it sounds like a few of you have had those. Those are often with recruiters. So one thing to keep in mind there is there's, depending on the organization size and the way that their human resources department, you know, the size of their human resources department, they may outsource their initial phone-in screenings. So it wouldn't be uncommon to interview with a recruiter that actually doesn't work at the organization, but, you know, works for the organization as kind of a contract person. So it's always really helpful context for you to know that whoever you may be interviewing initially on the phone, where they're coming from and what's their knowledge of the position. Because if you come up with a lot of questions around the position and the context, they may or may not be able to answer those. So I want to give that as a heads up, but the best way to navigate that is really trying to identify who that person may be on the front end, and maybe even doing a little bit of a LinkedIn search of them to learn about their background. Yeah, phone interviews are also generally shorter than the video interview, which can be good and bad. I mean, I've also seen it run, you know, they told me it'd be 30 minutes and ended up being an hour. So it really just depends on the connection that you make and how, you know, conversational the interviewer is as well as you are. And then on the flip side, the video, those can be live or recorded. So I think I've actually done one recorded interview where the interviewer is already pre-recorded questions, and then it'll tell me, you know, it'll ask me that question and you have to respond. The really important thing I would share here is those interviews will have generally instructions in the beginning, and really try to, I know for me, I get a little bit of, like, oh, I just want to get it over with, get through with it. And you don't want to miss the instructions initially, because some organizations will allow you to, you know, re-record yourself 2 or 3 times before actual submission of that answer. And then some organizations only one and done. So you'll really want to double check, like, do I get a re-recording? Do I not? And know, you know, how that may prepare you mentally different either way. And then with those video, they might be more in depth. Don't get me wrong, the phone interviews can also be in depth. I've also heard of people being on like a panel phone interview where, you know, they're talking to multiple people, but they can't see them. So it's just best to ask questions in the front end. I would say in the age of kind of where we're at now with employers, I don't know that, you know, too much communication about and preparing for an interview is ever, there's never too many questions you can ask. So don't ever be shy about that. If you ever have questions, feel free to reach out to us. But yeah, you may experience one or more of these types of interviews in the same application process. So heads up about that as well. So some tech tips. The best thing to do is, you know, oftentimes employers will give you a heads up how you might be meeting, whether that's Zoom like we are today, or Google Meets, or a different platform that maybe you are limited in understanding of. Highly recommend downloading the software, even if they say like, we're going to send you a link, you don't need to download anything. I would even encourage you to kind of research a little bit about that software so you can just get an idea of what to expect. I think this is where you as an interviewer can kind of prepare yourself to make you feel more confident. And none of this can be kind of understated. I myself, you know, am maybe a little bit more of a eager interviewer or anxious interviewer. So I'm just like, oh, it'll be fine. I'll push through it. We'll do it all the morning of. It's probably a little bit of my personality too, to be honest. And that can be great and good energy, but it can also, you know, you can kind of mitigate a lot of any potential issues by kind of following this. So download the software, connect with a friend and test it out if you can. Testing your connection on your, you know, webcam, microphone, headphones. You know, I've noticed sometimes I update my computer and then all of a sudden something went awry and it no longer works the way it used to. So double checking that even the day of and prior. And then, you know, if you have an option for a computer webcam or a phone, and you could use your phone, but you have the computer webcam, highly recommend that. It's a little bit easier to use, as well as using headphones and earbuds rather than your computer speakers. They can sometimes have a little bit more of an echo. And so those are just a little bit better options if you have access to those. And then double checking your username. This one, actually, I think Masha has a great story about double checking the username.
I've read several stories at this point about people logging into Zoom after their kids have used them, and then they accidentally join an interview being like Fuzzy Bunny 52. And it's a little bit of an embarrassing moment, and sometimes in the moment it can be challenging to figure out how to change your username. So doing that ahead of time and making sure it's not left over from a child or from that fun Zoom party you had with friends several months ago can be a way to avoid that kind of embarrassment. Yeah.
Thank you, Masha. Yeah, I think it can leave us all a little frazzled. I used a link earlier this week through Masha, and my name came up as Masha Finn, so it looked like both of us were there, but it was really two different. It was Masha and Mara. So thanks for sharing that, Masha. And then check your phone connection too. Like if you get better connection through your phone, you may want to consider how you might utilize that connection if it's harder with your computer. So one kind of key tip, or one way to perhaps impress employers to kind of get ahead of the game if there are tech issues, is asking for an alternate phone number. If you're doing a video, or even if you are on the phone and if we get disconnected, is there another way I can reach you? I can't tell you enough how many times I've engaged with an employer, or have seen students or alums engage with employers on the phone and then lose connection, and then not sure what phone number to call back or get reconnected. So the more more questions are better here. So asking for that. And then this kind of goes without saying, but putting away your phone if you have it, but also have it in reach if your video does fail. Putting your phone on silent is great. But I know like my phone still flashes when something happens, so that can be a little bit of distraction. So logistics here, maybe these go without saying too, but I know time and time zone, I always get backward on these. So double checking that you're in the right time zone. And even if, the employer doesn't give it to you, just to clarify, because again, they might hire a recruiter that may be calling you from the East Coast, even though their organization is here in, the Twin Cities. So you just really want to double check and ask and ensure that that's the correct time zone, or if they haven't indicated it, asking for that. Understanding the length of the interview, which will be really helpful for those of you who, I know I was in a small studio apartment. So if someone else is around, then they can kind of give a heads up you can give them a heads up. Family members or whoever might be living with you at this time, friends, to give them a heads up that, I'm going to be in an interview from this time to this time, and try to kind of mitigate any noises. Of course, it's not always the case, like Molly mentioned, there's construction or kids or things happen. So most employers are going to be understanding of that, but it's useful to kind of get ahead of that if you can. And then knowing who might be home, just so you can kind of let them know what you'll be doing and what you need from them. And then identifying again, like who you'll be talking to. So I know I mentioned this as, the recruiter piece, but even in future interviews, you might get a panel of interviews and there might be one person kind of managing the logistics of it, but that may not be the person you're interviewing with, or the multiple people you're interviewing with. So clarifying who that might be is really useful for even kind of preparing yourself for research on the front end, to search them on LinkedIn and know what their backgrounds are. So maybe you can ask more specific questions. Presentation webcam. So some of you got to this. Prepare your outfit. I don't know if any of you have seen this or heard about this Good Morning America situation. This man was being interviewed. I don't know if he came back from a jog or he was going on a jog after this interview. He was gonna make it real short and quick. And the camera lens actually went right to his thigh there. So, I think it's great. People are like, yay, no pants all the time. It's a great idea. It's really comforting. And also just recommend, dressing from head to toe. There's, the interview won't be that long, but it's best to mitigate, issues like this. So yeah, That's really funny. And then tidying up your background. So of course, you may have a variety of things in your background, but as much as you can kind of make it clean or just less distracting. You don't want your background to kind of overtake what the employers are seeing of you. I know for me, I'm like, oh, I'm visiting so many people's homes, which is really exciting to kind of see people in their spaces. But it also, yeah, you just don't want to take it away from you. So the less distracting, the better. And then warming up. So perhaps talking on the phone beforehand, connecting with a friend that can kind of just help kind of ease the early morning voice that, maybe isn't as warm as, midday. So eye level, I don't even know that I've practiced that super well, like looking into the camera. But the more you can do that, the better. And then trying to get your computer on kind of eye level as well. So, this man used a tire. You probably don't have a tire laying around. But it's just to show like anything works. No one's going to see what's elevating your computer. Whatever you need to do to get it to eye level, the better. And then kind of just checking out the lighting. It changes throughout the day. What looks, bright to you may not look that bright. So for this woman, she has a lot of, darker light behind her, and it's also not at eye level. So it's not as useful if you kind of feel like, oh, I'm in this like dark room with you. It feels a little peculiar. And then kind of the difference of what kind of going with like the window behind you or the window in front of you, and what that lighting can do for that right side picture. So kind of testing that out, figuring that out for yourself, just so you can feel in the best light possible. And then stay engaged. It's so hard to convey enthusiasm, know where the employer's at and hearing, but beforehand, go for a walk, warm up your voice by talking with a friend, get your energy up, do your power poses or whatever you need to do to feel really confident. On the phone, if you're interviewing on the phone, one kind of helpful tip that I think is easily forgotten, at least, is to smile constantly while you're talking, which can feel really odd because you may not do that generally, but that can actually help and convey the enthusiasm through your voice when you're smiling and talking at the same time. So that can help convey that energy. And then if it's helpful to walk around and kind of pace, that's also something I think a lot of people do and find to be really useful. Ways that you can be an active listener. I know some of you touched on, like interrupting and not knowing like when's possible to talk and the lag. Ask for clarification if needed. Like tech issues are for sure going to be a problem at some point, are going to be experienced. So, if we were in person interviewing, we would never have to say like, oh, like it's, I guess what I'm saying is like, it's not uncommon to just try to like roll with it when you're kind of hearing it glitching, but you're getting like 75% of the information. You don't have to make yourself do that. I wouldn't encourage it. Just share like, oh, I'm, having trouble hearing you. Or if you didn't fully quite get the question, you can just ask for clarification if needed. You can, try rephrasing it back to them and say, was that the question? I think I had trouble hearing through my computer, whatever it is. And then taking any notes can be really useful. Even if the employer sees you kind of writing down, I mean, you can let them know at the onset, like, it's really helpful for me to take notes. I'll just be looking down, that's what I'm doing. And you can share that at the front end, just so that they know, you're not distracted. And then they are also going to be like, great, I love that you're taking notes. It's not a bad thing at all. It's really great to hear that, you're that engaged, you want to kind of stay on top of it. And then maintain eye contact. Body language and facial expressions matter. One that I'm reminded of is kind of that posture, and then making sure you're not like slouching, or some of us might be having an interview from a bed or wherever it might work at the time. But yeah, as much as you can kind of just double check your posture to know that you're sitting up straight. Otherwise the employer may read through your body language and not saying like, oh, they probably have a poor support on their chair or wherever they're sitting. They may see it as maybe they're not as engaged or they're not excited. It's hard to tell. So just keeping those things in mind, they still do matter on a video when people can see you. Finally, this is probably the biggest part. Awkward moments, they're bound to happen. Virtual silence is always much longer than what feels like in-person silence. Communicate, stay calm, and problem solve. I think these awkward moments are kind of, not to put the pressure on, but can be kind of the in real time moment of testing like how you might deal with stress or issues. So the best way you can prepare for all of these is going to be really useful for you, and show up probably how they might expect you to connect in the future. But pauses are okay. Asking for time to think about a question is totally acceptable always. So you can always, if you're like, ooh, this feels like a long pause, then you can communicate like, oh, I'm going to take a moment to think about that one. Thanks, like, great question. And you can share that just to kind of let them know that, you're thinking about it and you heard them. Tech glitches, we've touched on some of these, but, unfortunately I'm having some issues with connection. Could you repeat the question? And those are totally acceptable things. They're bound to happen. Employers are, I'm sure, have experienced it many times with other people they're interviewing. So best way you can advocate for yourself is communicate and ask those questions on the front end. I think I'll turn it over to Masha.
Hi, everyone. So now that we've talked about a lot of the best practices around the virtual interviewing component, now we'll talk about the content of the interview itself. So how you can best prepare for the conversation that you're going to have with future or prospective employers. And preparation is key always. And so want to start with kind of the foundation of how you think about relaying your story. And so a lot of times people jump immediately to thinking about how am I going to answer all of these questions? And ultimately, how you want to answer those questions is derived from what story you want to be sharing with a future employer. So what are some of the values that you hold that you want to be sharing with that interviewer? How do you want to share the qualities and contributions that you can have for that position? And ultimately, what goals do you have for the interviewer to learn about yourself? So ultimately, I think before you even start thinking about the content of those answers that you want to give to interview questions, thinking about, I want this interviewer to understand this about myself. I want to feel confident that I've shared these qualities, these strengths, so that you come away from the interviewer feeling like you've done what you wanted to do. And I think part of this is oftentimes people go into interviews feeling like the interviewers hold all of the power in the connection. And we want to share all of this in order to show that you have power here too. You're empowered to figure out what is it that you want to get across and how do you want to get it across through those interview questions. So in terms of preparation, all of these are for in-person interviews, phone interviews, video recordings, all of the above. These are going to be helpful preparatory to-dos for all of those things. So researching the employer is really key. So understanding more than just the About Us page on the website. So that might be looking them up in the news, understanding the values of the organization, figuring out what are the latest initiatives, latest projects, so that you can be in the know about what's going on with that company before you even start having conversations with them. Another important piece is knowing the job description well. It can feel really like a panicky moment when you get called in for an interview, you're really excited about it, but then you can't find the job description because they've taken it off the website. So every time you apply for a position, save that job description somewhere, because you will likely be referencing it regularly as you prepare for the interview, so that you understand the ins and outs of what you might be expected to do as part of that role. Another piece as you think about preparing is considering how you would tackle the first few weeks or months in a position. So that ends up being sometimes a question of like, how would you get the ball rolling? How would you connect with your new colleagues or your new supervisees? And thinking that through can show an employer that you're not just thinking about your strengths as they pertain to the job, but you're thinking, how do I get started? And it can help them start to imagine you already as part of that company if you come in with some ideas of how you would tackle those first few weeks or months in the role. Another thing to prepare is writing up talking points and questions for the employers, and we'll get into that. In-person interviews, you can absolutely bring notes, but when you're doing remote interviewing, you have even more access to kind of having your notes all around you. You know, organizing them in a way so that they don't make too much noise if you're looking at, you know, some of your papers, but it's a nice way to be able to quickly reference your notes. And then the thing we're going to talk most about now is reviewing those common questions and preparing your answers for them. So oftentimes the first question that is asked in an interview is tell us about yourself. So it's kind of a trick question. It's not really a question at all. And sometimes that comes off as tell us about why you applied for this position or why are you interested in our organization. It's whatever that opening question is, and it's best to be prepared for it. So I love this meme because I think when you don't necessarily think about what they're actually asking you, you can go back way too far and start talking about, well, I was born here and I have these hobbies, and you know, that's not really what they're asking when they're asking you about yourself and your interests in the position. So preparation is key. And ultimately what they're asking is, give us a brief overview of your skills and experiences and what has led you to apply for this position. So that might bring you to a quick overview. You know, I most recently worked as a communications specialist for a nonprofit organization where I got to do this and this. Prior to that, I was in these particular roles. So you kind of give a very brief, briefly cover some of that history. And then you end with, and now I'm ready to take on a position in an organization where I believe in the mission and can apply my skills to whatever position you're applying for. So you kind of walk them through a brief story of yourself. And you don't necessarily have to organize it exactly this way, but this is a helpful kind of structuring tool. So you can think through, how do I relay my story briefly in a way that doesn't ramble on and on, but gives them a little bit of insight into what you might be elaborating on later on in the interview. And so I'm curious from all of you, it'll be the same texting feature, so you can just continue texting to this. I'm wondering, what are some interview questions you've encountered? We'll cover how to answer some of them, but I'm curious if there are any that in particular that have come up a lot for you, or maybe if there are some that you particularly dread. I know I have my favorites, maybe not so favorite. But yeah, go ahead and submit any questions that maybe you've seen, encountered, and we'll talk through some best practices around answering some of those. Strengths and weaknesses. Yep, I always joke that that's everybody's favorite. It's not. People tend to run screaming from that one, but we'll talk through how to answer those. Yeah, what from your past experiences do you bring to the position? Do you prefer to be a leader or an independent contributor? Yeah, and that one can be a little bit challenging because you don't want to necessarily say you have a preference for one over the other. What happened with your last job? And where do you see yourself in 5 years? What happened with your last job, I think especially during COVID-19, can be a little bit tricky about, you know, what necessarily happened or what kind of details do you feel like you need to share or not share? And where do you see yourself in 5 years? Sometimes people talk about, where do you see yourself in 10 years? Where do you see this position taking you within our company? And it's a bit of a pressure cooker on what if you don't want to stay there for 5 or 10 years? Yeah, describing a situation with a colleague where you disagreed. We'll talk about that, those tell me about a time when kinds of questions. And then I saw another one, I'm forgetting which one it was. Oh yeah, tell us about a challenging situation. So those kinds of, the way those are positioned, the way those are framed can be really interesting. And then how do you keep boundaries? So maybe it's a work-life balance or boundaries if you are managing employees, or you're wearing different hats within an organization. And then the, why do you want to work here? Why you? That's a big one. Why should we choose you of all of these different candidates? These are great. And so we'll share a compilation of these when we share the presentation, so you can take a look at these. Maybe you'll find some that you want to prepare for. Thank you for this. So some common questions that you also have contributed. So why are you the best fit for this position? Why, of all of the candidates that are coming in, should we choose you? And so coming up with your strengths, the qualities that really make you shine, can help you position yourself best to answer that kind of question. Why are you uniquely well positioned for the role? And sometimes that means even thinking about, how have you been seen in other positions? How would your colleagues or recent supervisors describe you? That can sometimes help you come up with the ways that you are standing out. And that kind of speaks to the strengths, weaknesses. I think it's a common Hamline trait. Maybe it's a Minnesotan thing, but I do think it's particular really to Hamline, is that Pipers are a really humble and modest bunch. And that is a wonderful quality to have, but when you have to toot your own horn in an interview, it's not always the best quality. And so sometimes it takes some energy, some consulting with friends and colleagues to figure out what is it that is unique and good and special about me that makes me a good fit for the role. And that's something that we can assist folks with, is kind of coming up with the language to talk about yourselves. But building up your idea of how you are, what strengths you bring, how you're contributing, what are the ways that this organization is going to benefit from you being there, are the ways that you can answer some of these questions. So thinking about why you want to work for that organization or company, when doing interview prep with students and with alumni, that's sometimes the last thing that people think about. They often think about themselves and their own personal contributions, and rarely do they recognize that a company wants someone who wants to work there. Not just wants to work in that position, but they want an employee who is excited to be a part of that organization. So the more research, that employer research you can do on the front end to figure out, what is it about that company that really appeals to me? Is it their values? Is it the nature of the work? Does it feel like this is an organization I can really see myself in, and why? That can help you answer some of those questions really well. And then in terms of strengths and weaknesses, so I've heard some people answer strengths just by listing them, and that's frequently insufficient. So usually they'll ask, like, what are your 3 top strengths? And then you'll end up, hopefully ahead of time, coming up with a list of maybe 3 to 5 strengths that you may want to elaborate on in an actual interview. So maybe you'll say, I have really strong communication skills, and then you'll give an example. So you'll say, I frequently am the person that people turn to write really solid emails. I'm constantly, editing and reviewing and making changes so that they're as strong as they can be. So there's an example of a strength and an explanation of it. And then when folks in interviews ask about weaknesses, they're not just trying to find a way to, take you out of the running. That's not really what they're aiming for there. Usually when folks are asking you about your weaknesses, they're trying to get at your sense of self-insight. So how aware are you of the things that you are working to improve upon? So another way to think about that question is, instead of asking, what is a weakness that you have, think about them asking, what is something that you're working on? Because I think that can help you reframe how you answer it. So instead of saying, I'm super disorganized, which probably isn't going to be a great thing for you to share with an interviewer, you might say, something I've noticed is I've struggled with prioritizing some of my major assignments. And so here's what I've been doing to address that. And it's been making a huge difference in my work. And over the last 2 years, my supervisor has even shared with me all the ways that I've been able to make improvements in this area. And I'm excited to apply what I've learned to my next position. So That way you're showing, I'm aware of some of the things I'm working on. I'm not afraid to improve myself, and I've already been taking steps to do so. So the weakness you can kind of turn around and make it into something that really shows your capacity for change and improvement. Now, some of the questions that you all submitted were these types of framing. So tell me about a time when. So it's an opportunity for you to share a story. And so this prep work ahead of an interview is really valuable so that you're not totally thrown off and forced to come up with an example from one of your past jobs that maybe you haven't fully thought through. And so what I would encourage you to do, instead of trying to come up with an answer for every single possible tell me about a time when question, which frankly is impossible and would take you forever, what I would encourage you to do is look at each experience on your resume and come up with several challenging experiences and moments of success for each of them. And more often than not, you can pull those examples and those stories to answer a multitude of tell me about a time when questions. So these can be used to, these prompts can be used to shape maybe some of the stories that you find about your past experiences. But thinking about it in terms of successes and challenges can really help you come up with those stories a little bit more readily. And when you are asked, tell me about a time when something happened, I highly encourage you to actually use a story, share an example. So many times people answer somewhat in generalities, like, oh, when I disagree with people, I tend to want to talk it out and it tends to work out just fine. That's not what they're asking. They're asking for a real story. And so the way that you can shape how you share that story is by breaking it down. And we'll share this with the materials as well, is describing the situation. So detailing the background, the context of where you were at and what had to be done. So that task, what needed to be accomplished, what was the challenge at hand, your particular role in taking action. So sometimes people will say, we, the group, really they're interviewing you. They're not interviewing your whole team. So making sure that you share what you did, how you did it, and then ending with results. What was the final outcome? What were you able to accomplish? Are there quantifiable results that you can share with the interviewer to show what you were able to do in that story? So if you're the kind of person who either in moments of stress, maybe goes blank or starts rambling, this can be a really helpful tool to construct those answers so that you can feel confident in how you're sharing the story. So at the end of an interview, oftentimes employers will ask, do you have any questions for us? And there are a few ways you can think about this, and I want to make sure we have time for questions as well. So I'll jump through these a little bit, maybe more quickly. But when employers ask, do you have any questions for us? There are two ways you can kind of think about this. So some questions you might ask will help you assess fit. So Mara was talking previously about how it can be kind of challenging to get a sense of an organization. If it's really important to you to understand whether there are advancement opportunities within an organization, whether the org supports career growth, that's a question you could ask. If it's important for you to understand the supervision style of the person you'd be working with or the leadership style within the organization, this is something you can learn more about through this interview process. And then describing the culture of the org. So maybe you can't see how the conference room is set up or whether there's a lunch area, but maybe this can speak to, you know, do people have lunch together, or do people spend time together outside of the organization? Or maybe you could even dig in a little deeper beyond how would you describe the culture. You could ask, you know, how is feedback given and received, if that's something that's important to you. So assessing fit and alignment, these three questions could be helpful to you, but that's not the end all be all. It's all about what's a priority for you in terms of your fit and kind of excitement about the position. Another way to think about these questions that you can ask at the end is, this is an opportunity for you to show your curiosity for the position, for the field, for the organization, and it can also demonstrate any research that you've done. So maybe you're asking about challenges in the field, challenges in the position, or maybe you're wondering, what does success look like for me in this role? And that can show them that you're curious about the ways you can be successful as you enter the organization, and you're already thinking ahead. So you don't even have the job yet, and you're already thinking, how do you measure success so that I can make sure that I'm doing well? Another way is your company I saw your company is doing this new thing. How would I play a role in that? So again, showing curiosity and eagerness to get started. And during COVID-19, some of those questions might look a little bit different. So we came up with a few possibilities. So maybe it's maybe because of the connection or something, you want to make absolutely sure that you've answered all of their questions, and you want to double check by asking that. Maybe you're wondering whether the position has changed in light of COVID-19, or if the organization or the project you might be working on is starting to evolve due to some changes in the org. And this is a question that we always recommend asking at the end of an interview, but especially during the pandemic, when some hiring processes might be a little bit more delayed, asking, what's your timeline? When can I expect to hear back from you? And I also wanted to summarize for everyone kind of what the general structure of an interview might look like. So especially remotely, make sure to log in early, turn off all of your notifications so nothing's dinging in the background, and arrange your materials. That's something that can be helpful to do right away. And then during the interview, this is something you may all be very comfortable with, is just the overall structure, but some nice to meet you, some introductions, those are still the case remotely. Then of course the back and forth of questions, and then a conclusion. And something I really want to emphasize is thank you emails are extremely helpful. And can't tell you how many times I have interviewed people and not gotten a thank you within the career field. So it can be really helpful to show I'm committed to this position, I'm really excited and grateful for the opportunity, and share that with them after the fact. It can really make you stand out. So no, we don't have that much time left, but I would love to take any questions that have come in, or any questions that you all have come up with in the last few minutes we have here together.
So we have a few questions coming in, and I'm going to just kind of lob a few to you both. Regarding the intro question, how brief is brief for that intro question? 3 minutes, 5 minutes? Is it a 30-second elevator speech? So really that very first thing you described, how long should that be?
I would say something like 3 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. 30 seconds is nice and quick, and it's kind of the goal for those introductions, but it rarely is enough time to really get across what you want them to get to know about you right at the beginning. So I would say 2 to 3 minutes is sufficient. And Mara, I don't know if that's, if you feel any differently about it. Yeah.
Nope, feel similarly.
Is the interviewer really interested in your answer as much as he or she is assessing your communication skills and how you appear and present yourself? Probably a good question for virtual and not virtual.
My take is both. I think a standout answer can even, show further than your presentation. I don't think either can be minimized. Of course, there's some interviewers, we just don't know their personality or kind of how they interview. They may be more attentive to that presentation and how you're communicating. There may be other ones who are like really looking for that depth of reflection and intentionality in what you're sharing. So I can't underestimate the intentionality of the example and what you're actually sharing. And Masha, anything to add their thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say they're both important, and both are being assessed during your answers.
I would say even from an employer perspective, I just think of certain ways people answer questions in terms of the story they tell can really make a difference. And I've felt that as I've looked to hire as well in a different role. But
have you found employers making allowances for the virtual interview, or do you think employers' expectations have shifted or will shift as more and more people do conduct virtual interviews? I'm just thinking about how much sort of grace and forgiveness is given when things go wrong now, or do you think people's, hiring managers' expectations will change as they assume people are going to get more and more comfortable with that? Have you seen anything in that realm?
Yeah, so as from what I've seen, empathy is pretty high among everyone these days. And I think there's a fine balance of like being mindful of some of the things that might go wrong. And you don't want to show up late and say you had tech issues, right? Because that shows that maybe you weren't troubleshooting ahead of time. And at the same time, there might be things that come up that employers are pretty understanding of because we are still new to all of this. So I think there's a pretty high degree of empathy all around, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing the things that you need to do to prepare effectively.
So one last question, and then before I ask this question, I also want to mention there's a few questions in the Q&A that I think might be better for a direct response. So there's two in particular, and if you put a question in there that we don't get to today, would you email alum@hamline.edu, and I will help you track down the answer to that. There's a question about recommendations for career coaches, and one that wants a little bit more information about transitioning into education from a business career. So those of you who put those questions are in there, you know who you are. So if you email alum@hamline.edu, that'd be great. We can try to get to those. But actually, one I just referenced, how much of the tips and tricks you've offered today need to be tailored for industry? Thinking again of educational sector versus the business sector, where the cultures and the industries are different. How much of what you've described do you think sort of can translate, and where could somebody go find more information that might be specific to a particular sector?
I think most of the tips and tricks can be pretty much applied to any industry. I think the caveat there is honestly going to the organization itself, researching their website and their values and the way they may go about it. I mean, there may be, employers who, ask kind of off the wall interview questions, or kind of, approach the way that they talk about their culture and communicate differently. And those are things you can generally glean from reviewing kind of the interactions you've had with them already, but also their website. So I think, for the most part, those are pretty much applied. I can't think of an area, but maybe Masha, maybe you have some thoughts.
So I'm thinking these are all like best practices for kind of foundational remote virtual interviewing. And there might be some sectors where you get some supplemental kind of like add-ons. I'm thinking about like teaching, you might be asked to present a lesson plan, or do like run something actively in front of an audience, or for like tech positions, you might be asked to do some live coding in front of an interviewer, but like with a shared screen, that kind of thing. So there might be some additional components, but at the core of it, these are all going to be applicable across the board. And I would say if anyone has used Glassdoor, that can be a really helpful resource, glassdoor.com. And it's where you can go and read reviews about organizations. So, always take it with a grain of salt. It's like the Yelp of employers. But it can give you some insight into the interview process. So for particular organizations, for particular industries, you might notice people writing like, this was the interview process. I had a phone interview, then a video interview, then I had to run, I had to do an online test or something like that. So that's the only kind of the main difference that I see in I would highly recommend joining Glassdoor and checking that one out.
So I know I said that was the last question and it's 12:31, but you guys, there's one more question that I think really speaks to a lot of the things people brought up early in the session. So for those of you who need to step away, we understand, but I want to lob this one last question, I promise. If you are too nervous, how can you save the situation afterward? And when is it okay to follow up if you haven't heard back and it's been longer than expected? I think those two go to some of what we heard early on.
Yeah, so I'll take the second one first. If it's been a week to 10 days and they said that they would be able to get back to you within a few days or a week, go ahead and reach out. I think people are nervous about pestering others. And I think in this virtual landscape, it is okay to reach out, to call, or to send an email and share, you know, I'm still really excited about the position. It was wonderful connecting with you last week. I'm wondering if you have any additional information about next steps. So it never hurts. And the worst thing they could say is, we don't have any other information, but we'll be in touch. So highly recommend following up within 7 to 10 days, especially if they promised an answer earlier. And in terms of nervousness, Mara, do you want to take that, or you could try answering?
Yeah, I think when I think about nervousness, I think about the fight or flight engaged brain, where we're really, you know, hyperstimulated. We're not really maybe feeling coherent. It's kind of, you know, sometimes interviews can feel like a threat, and they're not meant to, but I think the situation that on the spot can really trigger that feeling, and maybe speaks to that nervousness. I would encourage, you know, if you felt like your nervousness got in the way, I would take a beat. I would write out kind of what some of the questions were, how you might have answered them, write them down on a piece of paper, kind of take some time, like, you know, give yourself an hour to decompress, perhaps chat with a friend. But, you know, when you wrote down those notes, hopefully that was kind of the objective view of like, this is what was said, this is what was asked, and hopefully give you a little bit of time to decompress from the situation. And perhaps, you know, maybe you're nervous and maybe you really felt that nervousness, but after you look at it, you know, from an hour or two later, it actually maybe wasn't that bad, or you chat with a friend. And, you know, hopefully you're asking a friend who you feel really confident that they'll give you their honest opinion too, and not just try to boost you up. But I think give yourself some time. I think this is so new. I mean, sometimes, you know, employers might be nervous too in this virtual landscape as well. So from there, if you've really decided like, yeah, I really, you know, I think following up via email when you share your gratitude for the interview, you may, you know, place like a short sentence just to address, you know, really looking forward, you know, re-engaging kind of the positive attributes of the position, why you're excited. And, you know, perhaps you allude to, you know, I felt really nervous, but I'm really excited, want to touch on that and kind of keep it in that positive light. I don't know if there's things you would share, Masha, but I don't know that you'd have to justify, or unless something went, you know, truly wrong.
And I have heard from people who have, you know, and help coach people through addressing questions they felt that they didn't adequately answer. And so that could be the way that you navigate that. So you could share your, you know, your excitement for the role and your gratitude for the conversation. And then you could also say, you know, looking back, I realized that I didn't necessarily address this question as effectively as I had hoped. Here's what I was hoping to get across. And I'm happy to provide additional information or supplemental, you know, answers if that would be helpful. And I have heard of some people very boldly at the end of their interviews say, you know, is there anything that I've shared that would make you question or maybe decide against bringing me in for a next round, and then addressing it there and then in the moment. So I know that doesn't necessarily speak to that question, but if there are times when, you know, you're not sure if you were answering the question accurately, or, you know, the reaction made you feel like, oh, maybe I didn't say that the way I hoped to, you could address it after the fact. But I do think that requires some additional finessing. We're happy to help. And I think, as Mara said, talk to some friends whose opinions you trust and you know that they'll be honest with you.
All right, thank you so much. Masha, and Mara. Really appreciate your time today and all of your expertise. And thank you everybody who joined us today. As I mentioned, if you have a question that we didn't get to, Masha and Mara's contact information is on your screen right now, but you can also email alum@hamline.edu. And I'd be happy to pass those things along as well. So if we didn't get to your question and you would like us to, please don't hesitate to reach out. And again, thank you to our speakers. Thanks to everybody for joining us. We have several more Leo lectures coming up at the end of September, first week of October, including Masha and Mara again, talking about job search during COVID-19. So if you look on our alumni relations website, you'll find more details about that as well. If I had a question, I would ask about how you gracefully end these calls. But we'll move on. Thanks to everybody, and we will see you next time.